When did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to Hounds of Asher.
Hi and hello everybody out there. This is the House of Asher and I am Steve Asher. I'm thinking we're on episode 116, 117. It doesn't really matter because no matter where you're at, there you are. And what we're doing today is, as you know, I hate to say conspiracy. I prefer to use alternative history or just anything than that because usually it gets, conjurings of the tinfoil hat brigade and all that. The guy I want to have on today is not that. I'm probably even closer to that. But growing up, obviously there were different people in our lives, guys like, Elvis, Kennedy, FDR, a whole lot of different people who died, and it was sort of one of those wonky, like, I hear things. People, you can never keep things like that down because someone's going to talk or someone's going to slip up or whatever, and sooner or later it's going to go where these guys, which obviously FDR was shot and murdered, but like, what happened? What's going on? And then the stories of, apparently I heard Elvis was actually murdered. He did not die of whatever causes, and same with FDR. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. And also some new stuff that's coming out from Mr. Stephen. I will say the official Stephen B. Eubaney. B for, what is that for, Stephen? Welcome to the show.
Well, that's a great debate, is what the B's for.
The B.
It's for Brian.
Brian. That's okay. Well, whenever I do my little, stuff on folklore, my little books, I did Steve E. Asher, and most people just say Stevie Asher. Like all the people that knew me growing up called me Stevie. I don't know what they called you, but so that's just one of those things. And also there were some other people with the same, Steve Asher is I guess a more common name than I thought it was. But so let's kind of jump right into it, man. First of all, welcome to the show. I probably should mention some of you guys listen to this on Spotify, Speaker, iHearts, iTunes. You may be listening to this on SoundCloud. You may be listening to it on YouTube. And if you are, please, if you like this, like, subscribe, share with a friend and whatnot. And also visit Steve's page. Also, he has one up there which has a whole lot of interesting videos. But you most likely are listening to this on Paranormal UK Radio. That is based in England, and it goes all over this big gold globe, or if you're a flat earther, from point to point or from over the top. I don't know where that comes from. I'm not so much a flat earth guy, but anyway, if you are, I'm so glad that you're here. And do check out stevieasher.com and check out my books and check out my other things that's coming on. Anyway, enough about me. Stevie, take it away. And he's like, what do you want me to take away? What I want you to take away, Steve, is this. I appreciate you being on the show. I've heard you on different shows, and I've heard you lecturing and all these different cool things. What brought you to this? Was there something? Were you always like this as a kid? Were you always sort of into looking at alternate sort of stories and situations? What made your mind click like it clicks?
Well, Steve, first I'm going to say thanks for having me on your show, and hello to everybody out there who's listening everywhere and all over everywhere. To answer your question, I really don't know. Growing up, we have these moments in our life where things become lodged in your mind or indelified in your mind, and you just can't get past them, And these monumental things happen in your life, and of course you go to school or middle school or high school, whatever, and they take your fresh mind into their institution and bang and smash and bring you out a little soldier to think their way. Well, I never really got indoctrinated that way. I really thought, I guess I'm a poor American because I like to form my own opinions, I don't roll over on command. So there were some things that, like FDR, I have a book out, Who Murdered FDR, and if you actually dig decades and decades and decades after his death, information started coming out that, strongly indicates that FDR was murdered, but of course that wasn't covered in history in school. So I think that I've always had a genuine interest in these subjects, and as I grew older, I had the available time and the available resources to dig into the things that I always had earmarked as my passion. So I've always been fascinated by history, and I always had that mind. I always ask why 5 times. I call it the 5 times rule, Steve. And what I do is I come up with a question and I ask why, and when I get to that answer, I ask why again. And when I get to that answer, I ask why again. It's the ultimate critical thinking exercise. So I kind of merged my inquisitive mind with my love for history, and here we are. There's going to be a 6-book series on this. It's the Who Murdered book series, and my website, for those who are curious, is whomurderedbooks.com. All lowercase, one word. whomurderedbooks.com. And I'll give you the series. The first book was Who Murdered Elvis. The second book is Who Murdered FDR. The third volume was Who Murdered Elvis, the 50th anniversary, which has even more information into it. I ran into more and more people who realized they were investigating the same things that I was. And I was like, well, no, there's more people in this than I thought. So that's a third. The fourth one is the one I'm doing right now. It's Who Murdered Diana, and that's about Princess Diana. And the one after that is Who Murdered Tesla. Nikola Tesla's death was very, very strange. And the last one I'm going to wrap the series up is Who Murdered JFK, and that's volume 6. So I'm a big guy.
Well, yeah, obviously, and and that's the thing that I look at when I was looking over your books and stuff. One of the things I noticed that in both of them that I have, that you dedicated this to your parents. Now, were your parents all did they raise you to kind of go, well, look, question everything? It's don't take anything at face value, and it seems like they obviously would have been very instrumental in kind of forming your opinions and the way you think.
Well, the reason I dedicated them to my parents is, you can never pick your parents. But if I could have picked them, I would have picked these two. They are tremendously loving, caring people who have always supported me well. I can't say that they are conspiratorial people. My mother met President Kennedy in Erie when he was there. Of course, that entire generation knew that there was not a single shooter involved. There was a bigger story than that. So on that level, yes, they believe there's something bigger. But by and large, my parents are Ozzie and Harriet. The typical American middle class mom and dad sort of thing. So I couldn't exactly say that this is coming from them. Although they did kind of encourage me to always do my own thing.
Well, it amazes me that which is I'm using this as an example. Obviously, we're not talking about UFOs or aliens, but like the Brookings report, where they were like, if this come out, people would lose their minds, mass media, religious stuff would fall, governments would fall. But even something connected with this, I'm not for sure if it was Bush Sr. that talked about later in his life, when they're talking about how long they're going to have bans and lockdowns on certain information. I believe he was the one that said if they ever found out, they would drag us and kill us in the street, and which to me is so insane. The fact of going now, we're at the point now. I was born in '69, grew up to the '70s, and even the movies, the music, punk rock, all that stuff. It by its nature does not trust them, and I'm using air quotes, the masters, the people in the high places, just by default. And it seems like all these different things that you're bringing to light kind of gives credence to that belief. Obviously, like you said, it's one of those things. I do not call what you do as conspiracy theory, because you've got stuff that runs into like coroner reports and down to like what was going on with their kidneys and all their different body organs. It's not just you're not just pulling this out of the air, and that's a great thing about that I really like about these books. How hard was it to get all this information?
Oh man, it was like trying to pry open a clam. But I'm going to speak back to what you were saying here a second ago about growing up and people, the culture not trusting the government at such a point. And I think that we were always taught to trust blindly the government. I mean, when I say us, I mean the American people. When Kennedy got shot, it all changed. That, I believe, I wasn't on Earth, but I was born in 65, you're born in 69, but
Right.
I think that was the pivotal moment in time. It was almost like a coup took over this country. We went into the radical 60s, we went into Watergate, we went into Vietnam, and it's never been the same. It's never been the same. So I think that music that we were listening to was coming about in that culture where they knew that they were being fed crap. So I think that rebelling against the conspirators, which is no one conspires like the United States government, believe me. And when I say that, I have to give people the legal definition of conspiracy. There are people, conspiracy is a real thing. There are people in court for conspiracy today. It's not, the moon, Venus, and Jupiter don't have to align, and it's not all this, crackpot crazy stuff. The real definition of conspiracy is two people joined together to perform an act that may or may not be deemed criminal at some point in the future. That is the legal definition of conspiracy. So when you take in the legal definition of conspiracy, if you can prove that you have more than one person involved acting in concert to do something, by the legal definition, you have a conspiracy. This is why in the case of JFK, they were trying and failing very, very hard to convince the public one shooter. Because if you have two shooters, you've got two people acting in concert, you've got a conspiracy. So, in my books, these are hot button subjects, and like Who Murdered Elvis, for example, has 45 factual sources from documents, from doctors' records, FBI documents. I don't leave anything really to chance. I think I'm the foremost researcher now on Elvis Presley's death. I've been doing this for 10 years. And, I uncovered things such as there are two death certificates filed on Elvis Presley. One by his doctor, one by the medical examiner. It's not that way because I say it's that way. It's that way because I found them. Two death certificates contradict each other. So there are things that you can't debate tangible fact. So when I write these books, I take people to the source direct, to the documents, to whatever is necessary to prove the point. In the case of Elvis Presley, I started on this book series kind of by accident. I never felt good about the reporting of Elvis Presley's death. I never believed it was a heart attack. And, they're saying it was a heart attack, and then it was due to an irregular heartbeat. Well, in 77, I guess we were much more naive because both of my parents had atrial fibrillation, which is an irregular heartbeat. Excuse me. And you have to have a beating heart to determine an irregular heartbeat. You can't say that there was an arrhythmia or an irregular heartbeat after the person is dead. So, that is just a little term to make people go away quietly. Of course, that would never happen today. So, in the case of Elvis Presley's death, they did, first it keeps evolving. First he died of a heart attack, which is completely ridiculous. A lot of people don't know that Elvis Presley had two physicals head to toe in the weeks preceding his death. One by Lloyd's of London and one by his own personal doc. So they've done cardiograms, they've done everything, and there was no sign of any heart problems from Elvis Presley. In fact, I want everybody to do this. Go to my website, whomurderedbooks.com, click on the Elvis page, you go to the bottom, there's a video with Dr. Nicopoulos, Elvis Presley's doctor, telling everyone Elvis was murdered. And it was on A Current Affair in 1990. And no one talks about it. It's amazing how this just gets...
Well, I'm sure they buried it, and...
Oh, yeah.
The common thing I always heard as a kid, and understand, like, Elvis to a Southern kid was sort of like losing, sort of, I don't want to say your king, but definitely a distant relative that you were cool with. I mean, everybody dug Elvis. It was just how it is in the South. But of course, it was like, well, he died of a heart attack on the and on the toilet, and then it was like, oh well, no, well there was so many drugs involved. Well, then he was up and he was down. He had this, he had that. So like you said, it got so convoluted so quickly that really gave a lot of ammunition to the people that's going, no, wait a minute, this, like you said, with the two different death certificates, pardon me, obviously a very large red flag. So tell me more, what more that you found on that, and what did the doctor?
Oh boy, I was on Coast to Coast AM with this, and I was on for 3 hours, and then I took questions, and I still couldn't cover it all. There's so much information back in that 270-page book, but I'll do my best to give you the dime story here. Amazingly, I was not the only one who knew Elvis was murdered. Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, the first words out of his mouth were, "My God, they killed my son." So he, after Elvis's death, hired 2 private investigators to solve the murder. I did not know that until I dug into it, because Elvis Presley's father died in '79, which is 2 years after Elvis died. Susanna Lee, Elvis Presley's co-star on Paradise Hawaiian Style, was a very good friend of mine until I lost her last year before actually. She lost her long-standing battle with liver cancer, which is terrible because she was a beautiful lady. She said, what happened to her was incredible. She was living in Memphis in '78. He died in '77, and she was helping Vernon go through all of this stuff at Graceland, because Graceland was in a financial mess when Elvis died. And it got to the point where Elvis was worth more money dead than alive. And she went on Memphis television in 1978 and said, when are we going to solve the murder of Elvis Presley? And what happened to her was incredible. They tried to kill her twice. She was shot at. They sabotaged her car, the brakes in her car. One time there was a man who jumped over. She was living in a walled community. I know where it was, but I can't give you the address. But and this guy jumped over. They watched her leave in her car. He jumped over the wall, got in. She had 7 dogs. Guy murdered 6 of her dogs, and they were trying to scare her to get her to shut her up. Well, there was a 7th dog that was in her garden who mauled this guy. So the police come. This guy is partially gnarled, and they file a police report on it. Finally, they stopped the subtle tactics. She moved out of that condo, and she moved into her own house, which was a little bit more gated and secure, and they just burned her house down. So, they're trying very, very hard to shut people up. Ginger Alden, she gave an interview, which was Elvis's girlfriend at the time. Ginger Alden said, they were talking about foul play, and she said, I couldn't rule it out. There was a lot going on behind the scenes of Elvis Presley. As I said, Dr. Nick said right on television, Elvis was murdered. And finally, a guy who became one of my really good friends, Dan Warlick, who was at Elvis Presley's autopsy. He was also the medical examiner's investigator who went to Graceland and took the pictures and did all these things. And this is all covered in this book, and I hope everyone gets this book. I'll tell you what, I've got so much research into this book. If I'm making a penny an hour, I'll be astonished. It's a labor of love for me. I'll never be profitable on this book, but I just want the truth out. So Dan Warlick he moved to Nashville and became an attorney. And I met with him several times about this, and he died last year, which I found was a shock when I found that out. He was all of the notes, all of the pictures, all of the everything, all of the evidence that he tried to turn over to the medical investigator, Jerry T. Francisco. He just turned him aside. He didn't even look at him. So they do the autopsy on Elvis Presley, and before the toxicology reports or the fingerprints or anything is lifted from Graceland, You've got Jerry Francisco going on television, and it's only been a couple hours, saying that Elvis died of a heart attack. It took 12 days for Noguchi to turn back Marilyn Monroe's autopsy result. But this guy, a couple hours?
Right.
Insane.
So they're already trying to do the spin on it and try to go, no, it's this way.
Yeah, so he takes all this information, Dan Warlick, leaves it in his car, on the seat of his car, passenger seat, locks his car up, goes to bed. In the morning he comes down, his car has been burglarized. The only thing missing were the pictures and the evidence from Graceland. I mean, once you start adding these things up, you know, and one of the things that I hear about all the time, here's something I wanted to mention while I'm on the subject of my late friend Dan Warlick, who was a great guy, really a great guy. He was interviewing people at Graceland, and he realized that their stories were changing. Someone was telling them to say other things. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager and bodyguard, had said at the hospital that he found Elvis dead in bed. 2 hours later, when he gets back to Graceland, Elvis was dead in front of the floor, in front of the toilet.
Right.
Elvis was never on the toilet. There was never anything in the toilet. He was never on the toilet. This is something that gets lost in legend and lore. There was a wet spot in the carpet in front of the toilet, which was about 6.5 or 7 in front of the toilet, where Elvis had apparently regurgitated or whatever. And they tried to get his stomach contents were mysteriously washed down the drain at the Baptist Memorial. Of course, that negates a thorough autopsy, which the autopsy was a farce. So Dan Warlick, who was about 6'2", I would put him at, having known the guy, he laid down with his feet in front of the toilet, touching the toilet, and stretched out. This is almost 6.5, 7 feet from the toilet. So Elvis was never on the toilet. You're going to fall off the toilet, you're going to fall 3-4 feet. You're going to fall 6 feet for that. I mean, come on. So Elvis was never on the toilet. Elvis was tackled from behind, and he was driven into the ground, which is why his nose was in this shape in the casket, because they smashed the poor guy's nose. And of course, that nose was the conspiracy theory that it was a wax dummy and da-da-da-da.
Right.
Not true.
I remember that. I think it was the Inquirer or something like that had that.
Oh, yeah. Elvis is dead. I know the person who has his... What should I say that? Okay, why not? I know the person who has his organs in Tupperware containers in dry ice to this day. Okay?
What?
So,
wow.
If Elvis is walking around, he's walking around without many of his vital organs. Okay? So, I mean, this is just the story. It's just so it enrages me that they could take this wonderful man and do all of these injustices to him posthumously. You know? And then we had the drug thing. There were 3 drug tests, toxicology reports done on Elvis Presley. The first one was done at the University of Tennessee. It came back with basically nothing. It came back with no, there are different levels of what drugs you can find. Trace, you can find with trace. And there's therapeutic, which is what a doctor would recommend or prescribe. And that's done, to help you along your day with whatever you have, a pain or something.
Right.
Then there's toxic, which is beyond therapeutic, which makes you sick. If you get too much of what the doctor is prescribing, it'll make you sick. And then finally, there's lethal, which is deadly. The first one at the University of Tennessee, the first toxicology report, barely found a trace of drugs in Elvis Presley's body. So that wasn't enough. They had, because when the paramedics went to Graceland to get Elvis's body, someone there said, we think he OD'd. So if you've got a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. So they've got to find these drugs, right? So the first toxicology report turns up nothing. They do a second one at a nameless laboratory across town in Memphis. And this has never been revealed to me. And trust me, I've dug. That one came up with the same thing, drugs between trace and therapeutic. Nothing that would really cause any major problems. So a fellow named Dr. Harold Sexton, who was at the autopsy, took samples of all of Elvis Presley's tissue, or tissues from his organs, and he's the person who still has them today, and sent them off to bioscience laboratories in California, who at that time had the latest and the greatest equipment known to man, and they comes back with this one now, and a third toxicology report comes back that he has codeine in his body at 11 times the lethal level. What? Where does this come from? But we have a problem, and this is the basis of my book of why I completely believe that Elvis Presley was murdered, and that this is a cover-up, okay? I'll get to the murder in a second, and then we can move on to other things, because I don't want to dominate everyone's time with this. Dan Warlick undressed Elvis, examined the body, they found 2 empty syringes in Elvis Presley's upstairs. No needles. Empty syringes. Planted there as though they had neon signs pointing to them. Okay? Mm. So they're looking for needle marks on this guy, and he took, he still has the microscope. Actually, he picked it up. It's on his desk. He kept it as a souvenir. He said, I used this microscope, and he held it up, and he said, I examined every inch of Elvis Presley's body. There was one needle mark in him. Not one. Okay, so another thing he did was he dissected Elvis Presley's vocal cords. They think he OD'd. They were looking for an effective drug which would have caused anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis, people get stung by bees, their throat swells closed, and all that. Well, right. They looked for some sort of swelling in his vocal cords. There was none. So everyone knew that Elvis Presley was allergic to codeine. His doctors, his dentists, his nurses, everyone knew to keep codeine away from this guy because he took it after a dental visit in 1969, and anaphylaxis almost killed him. So there was no swelling in his vocal cord area, so there was no codeine in his body. So I posed the question to you and the world and whoever's listening: if there's no codeine in the body, how does it show up at 11 times the lethal level in one and only one of the 3 toxicology reports? Can't happen.
Right.
Doesn't work. So then you have to ask yourself, who would want to murder Elvis? Well, Elvis got to the point where he became very difficult to manage, and he wasn't drawing like he was before. So Elvis Presley's handler, Colonel Tom Parker, was a kind of an interesting guy. He was not, his name wasn't Tom Parker, he wasn't a colonel. He came from the Netherlands. His name was Andreas van Koo. He stowed away on a ship after murdering a woman over there, stowed away on a ship, came to America, went into the Army, went AWOL. On his way out of his dishonorable discharge, he took the name of his commanding officer, Tom Parker. So at the ripe old age of 23, here we had this murdering stowaway, wandering America, who had a history of working as a pitchman and a carnival barker over in the Netherlands. So he starts doing acts. He starts promoting acts. And he did Minnie Pearl. He did Eddie Arnold, all kinds of people. Roy Acuff, June Carter Cash, which later became, obviously, Johnny Cash's wife. He managed all of these people, Hank Snow. So by the time Elvis comes around, he sees what's happening here. So he, wiggles his way into managing Elvis. And Elvis got warned by Eddie Arnold. He said, this guy's no damn good, stay away from him. But, when Elvis and his father, when you put your hand in your pocket and all you feel is your leg, and you're talking to a guy who wants to put money in your pocket, just about everything sounds good. So he was warned, and it eventually cost him his life. Parker was, through managing these people, became very, very connected in Las Vegas with some of the people there who were big mobsters. One of the people were Milton Trell, who said he was out there for the Detroit Syndicate, and they're booking in race wire money had to be put into something. So they bought the Bingo Club out there, and later turned into the Sahara in '52. And of course, he bought the Aladdin, and then finally he bought the Mint. All big places in Vegas, especially at the time. He was a really good friend of Colonel Parker's. And Modalis is another one. In the '50s and '60s, there was no one bigger in Vegas than Modalis. So he was out there from the Cleveland Syndicate, and he ended up owning the Stardust and the Desert Inn. And he was out there secretly to be a closer ally to Meyer Lansky and Jimmy Hoffa. So Elvis Presley ended up being owned from behind the scenes by the same people who owned Frank Sinatra. So, you had the two of the biggest acts in the world being owned by these people. And at that time, the entertainment industry in America was run by these people. If you needed a favor, you came to these people and, they helped you out, So, you don't play Vegas without these people. So, even Elvis was so surrounded by mob in the background. His wedding was, they borrowed Frank Sinatra's plane. They went out to Vegas and got married in Milton Prell's hotel. He couldn't get away from these people. Elvis Presley had a terrible life. He really did. He smiled on camera and everything. But as this progressed in his career, Elvis was in a velvet jail. He couldn't do anything. It got to the point where, well, I'll get to that later. It got to the point where his entire life was being controlled for him. So he started to rebel. He got one of the scripts for these ridiculous movies that he never wanted to do. And
Clam bake and stuff like that.
Oh, well, I'm not going to mention the man's name. I talked to somebody who was in the room. I won't mention his name. I promised him I wouldn't. He's a super nice guy. He was with Elvis at the time, and Elvis got the script for this next movie. And Elvis looked at this script, and he gets furious, and he throws this script to me, and it's like 500 pages fly everywhere. And he's just furious. He said, "God damn it!" He said, "This movie, I'm a speedboat racer. The last one was a race car driver. The one before that, I was a motorcycle racer. It's the same script with a different girl." So he doesn't go to he's furious, and he calls Parker, and he says, "I'm not going. I'm not doing it." So he doesn't go to the set the next day, so filming can't start. So it's his first real time to rebel. The next day, what happens is RCA comes up, the director comes up, somebody from the record company comes up, another agent comes up, Colonel Parker comes up, and they have an impromptu meeting, and they tell him flat out, and I know somebody who was there, not secondhand information, or third-hand. You're going to do these movies, or you're not going to do anything else. And it was made abundantly clear to Elvis, we own you, you do this, period. So then Colonel Parker takes him aside and says, I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. And since I'm doing all of this work for you, we're now a 50-50 part. So Elvis was trapped, and they started sucking so much money out of this guy, he couldn't get away. So 1976 rolls around, Elvis is bankrupt. 77, he died with $1 million in the bank. For a guy that sold billions of records, you must honestly ask yourself where the hell all the money went, right? Well, it was being sucked out of him. He was their dancing monkey. It was a long-standing. He was owned. He was owned by people. So 1976 comes around. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, takes control of his finances and starts to downsize things so he can get solvent, so he can become solvent again. Told the guys, look, you can only drink. There was a certain type of bottle of water that I'm not going to mention the name. It's really expensive. Don't drink it. He tried to sell one. He let 3 of his bodyguards go. And there was a plane, the Hound Dog 2, which was Elvis's first plane. It was dry docked bought it for $899,000. And it was dry docked, just sitting there. Elvis had now bought the Lisa Marie, who's on to bigger and better things. Vernon tried to start to sell this plane. So he advertises it for sale. The guy who gets a hold of him is involved in an international mob sting. Who gets a hold of Elvis and wants to buy the FBI had been watching this guy. His name was Frederick Peter Pro. And he had been swindling people all around the world. Buys this plane, which is dry dock. Tells Vernon, look, you're going to need some upgrades on this plane. I'll tell you what, I'll buy the plane. I'll buy you on time. I'll pay for it on time. And you'll end up getting more than what you asked for. Well, Vernon loves this idea. So Vernon gives he gives him the plane. He's waiting for the payments to come in. Not one payment comes in. So there was an FBI scandal that Elvis Presley was involved in behind the scenes in '76. He was to stand as a witness for the FBI against these monsters. So now here you have Elvis Presley going to see Nixon, becoming a federal narcotics agent, and his manager in the mob, and him going after the mob for the theft of his plane. This will get just about anybody murdered. So it goes one step further, and then I'll get off this point, because I don't want to dominate this whole thing with Elvis, but it's just such a fascinating story. Elvis was playing 2 months a year at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, and it was part of his contract. Excuse me. And when he went to see Nixon, Nixon asked him to do a couple of things. Elvis hated the hippie culture, thought it was hijacking America, and I don't think it was wrong either. So Nixon said, hey, look, we're trying to bring down the Las Vegas mob. I'm going to help. Can you hide FBI agents as band members, pose them as band members in your band, so when they're out there they can look around a little? He said, sure. So there was a couple extra singers in Elvis Presley's band, and a person in the orchestra who were FBI agents, who weren't even band members. Well, if we know anything, I know that the movie Casino is kind of a fictitious story, but it's based on a true story. Mm-hmm. If we know anything from that, you know how vicious this time period was. The mob had every hotel bought. Well, they all got caught. All of them. They got caught trying to. Elvis got caught twice. Once in the sting of the stolen plane, and this time the mob caught him trying to turn state's evidence against him. So Elvis Presley actually died mysteriously shortly before he was to turn state's evidence against the mob in trial. That's what happened to Elvis Presley. It didn't have anything to do with, his irregular heartbeat, because there was none. So the book Who Murdered Elvis and the book after the 5th anniversary of Who Murdered Elvis, if you want your head to explode, read those 2 books. I'll never look at it the same way again. Well, Steve, I'm always a huge Elvis fan. And
go ahead. I was just going to say.
When I dug into this, I started feeling really, really sorry for this guy.
Yeah.
Biggest star in the world, and look at what they do to him.
Right.
We have no concept today of what a mega star is.
Right. Well, I think that, if you look, there's that pattern, and there was like the, I'm blanking on the age, was it the 20, I'm dyslexic, so I get numbers turned around, like the 28 club or the 23 club or whatever, and 26, there you are. And it had a lot of different people die, mysterious situations. Now, you were talking about the whole anti-hippie culture. Wasn't he actively trying to get guys like the Doors and like Jim Morrison and some of the other bigger names? Partially, I'm assuming because he didn't want the competition. I know he seemed like I've always heard that he hated the Beatles.
Yes and no. He liked the Beatles as people, and he liked their music. He liked them before they got into the wacky, long-haired stuff. He hated that whole movement and everyone attached to it. So he didn't hate the Beatles individually. He didn't hate the Beatles' music. He admired them very much as musicians, but he hated that culture and everything attached to it. That, hippie Woodstock thing. He just saw that as the beginning of the downfall of the country, and I'm not so sure he wasn't right.
Okay.
But So he hated everybody attached to him.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask you, unless you have a few more things you want to add on the Elvis thing, with FDR, you know, uh, it's one of those type of things. You see newsreels and whatnot, and different stuff he was involved in. Who it just doesn't seem like it's because like I said, maybe it's just at the age I'm in, but it's just like I was like, okay, well, who hated that guy so much that they would want him taken down? I'd heard all kinds of different stuff, everything from like relations to bankers and things like that. Because there were certain presidents that wanted to have different things on the gold standard, and there was always like a big pushback on that. I heard similar stuff with JFK on that as well. But let's touch on FDR a little bit, and if you can kind of encapsulate a little bit of the build up and what happened.
FDR is a really interesting thing, and I never really, he's like a god in America. People listening outside of America wouldn't understand. He opened up the government coffers and gave people money when they didn't have any money, and he was like an angelic figure here. People had like pictures of FDR in their house because he was giving them money and pulling them out of the grips of this tremendous depression. A couple of things about FDR. Right after the Terrain Conference in 1943, people around FDR started having brain aneurysms and dropping dead. And his personal secretary dropped dead. On the way back, back from the Terrain Conference, one of his high generals, Paul Watson, died on the ship coming back of a brain aneurysm, cerebral hemorrhage. And all this became all too common around FDR and the people around FDR. And, we have to remember the time period. There were all kinds of spies all around infiltrating. And we had spies, too. I mean, come on. It just so happens that I don't think that our spies got caught, and if they did, it wasn't as widely publicized, especially in America. But you had the Duquesne spy ring. The Nazis had 33 members that were over here, and they were all trying to kill Roosevelt. You had Operation Pastorius for 8 members of the Nazis. That was created after Pearl Harbor. There were all kinds of these people who were trying to get close in to murder FDR. So it got to the point where FDR became so sick that his body wasn't responding to. I want to mention one more thing before I forget this, and I apologize for jumping around. Hitler, we talk about them trying to assassinate the other leaders and having spies around. Hitler had at least 40 attempts on his life from 1933 and 1944.
Well, yeah, I knew of Project Valkyrie and stuff, but like you said, there's countless others.
Oh yeah, there's one that they tried to kill Winston Churchill, who was one of my cousins, by the way. They tried to kill him with an exploding chocolate bar. It's a story. Look it up, and the document is in my book. It was a declassified document from Britain. They tried to. There's all kinds of things that they tried to do with him. So your question, who wanted to murder FDR? FDR had a very temporary. Oh boy, should I give this away? Should I give the book away?
Don't give it all away.
Well, I'll say that Churchill and Roosevelt were fast friends, and they really liked each other, and they played well together. They were both very clever, very sharp. I think FDR was the greatest war president America ever had because it played into his cunning nature, but they had to gain another ally on another front to help turn the tide of the war because Hitler was no military midget. So they contacted Uncle Joe, Joseph Stalin. And Stalin was a real masterpiece. This guy was really something. He was a temporary ally. He didn't like Roosevelt or Churchill. FDR kept trying to warm him, get him to warm up. And, of course, FDR wanted to start the UN, and he promised him if he joined the UN, he'd give him all these special perks and everything. FDR wanted the four policemen of the world. FDR wanted the United States, Great Britain, China, and Russia, well, Soviet Union at that point, to police their little parts of the world so this type of thing never happened ever again. He never wanted another world war. Stalin didn't want to share the world with Roosevelt. He wanted to rule the world. Stalin got him. It was very obvious that he got him. He died in the presence of two Russian spies. And no one talks about this. And we know the naturalization, he died in front of the painter Elizabeth Shumatov, who was the painter to the Gardening Club of the World. She was coming in daily contact with people who wanted FDR dead because they were big into the stock market and they were losing fortunes because of all the regulation and everything that was being put on America. The Elizabeth Shumatov, she was a defected Russian. She was the daughter of a general, Nicholas Ivanov. Her family was influent, very affluent. They held high power. She married Leo Shumatov, and according to her book, quote, she came to America with Leo on a mission for the provincial government headed by Alexander Kerensky. Never said what the mission was. So they bounce around upstate New York in the Long Island area, where Leo finally finds work as a business manager for the Sikorsky Aviation Corporation, another Russian corporation. So, what's not known is how Shumatov and Sikorsky met, but and it's a big mystery as to how that whole thing happened. So, as a painter, she's painting people like. Well, she painted the FDR's her first portrait, and if you ever get a chance to see her work, she's incredible. Type in Elizabeth Shumatov's portraits. She's, wow, man, really talented. But she was in this, all the big money people who would have loved to have had her kill Roosevelt, just so they could be freed up to make some money. So she was painting the DuPont Corporation, all of those people, Eastman Kodak, probably Firestone, Samuel Colgate, of course, Colgate toothpaste, Henry Frick of Carnegie Steel, the Heinz family, the Hilton family, the Mellon family, of course, they're into the World Banks, and the Joseph Woodward from Coca-Cola. So here she is painting pictures and in the influence of all of these people shortly before she goes to paint FDR, and FDR dies in her presence. And no one talks about this. I mean, it's incredible what they don't tell us in the history books. So, you get to that point, and she goes to Warm Springs, Georgia in 1945, and Roosevelt has been reduced to all but a walking corpse. And she takes her assistant with her, his name is Nicholas Robbins, and he is the photographer because at night she would paint off the photographs. But, his real name is not Robbins. His naturalization papers say that he is Nicholas Kobachensky, who was changed to Robinsky, who was later changed to Robbins. So here we have these defected Russians, one with an assumed name, alone with the president, and he magically dies. And they're trying to figure out, what happened to this guy. I mean, how naive can we possibly be? It's 69 hours from death to grave. They couldn't get this guy in the ground fast enough. Never an autopsy, nothing. Really, really suspicious. So, if you look at the poisonings and everything that was going on at that time, I don't think there's any question what happened to him. I can't, in this time allotment, give you all of the evidence that I have. There's a ton, but he died in the presence of two Russian spies, and no one talks about it. Stalin had to be one of the greatest hideous murdering monsters on this planet. He was one of the first members of the Politburo. and he was part of the Bolshevik Revolution. There were six other revolutionaries, and I'm not going to bother you with their names. Lenin and Trotsky were two of them. And he murdered his first wife because she decided to go against him. Murdered his second wife. Anybody who ever went against him ended up being murdered. His doctor, Professor Dmitry Pletinov, he was head of the Kremlin hospital, and he used to massage Stalin every day, and Stalin told him too much. He ended up getting murdered. And, of course, then he started the Great Purge because, I don't know if people who aren't familiar with this, the Great Purge was, they were basically show trials of anyone that he deemed that had spoken out against him or the government or anyone in high power that was not 100% in allegiance to him. So they'd be put up on a trial, which they were already going to be guilty anyway. It was a show trial. And he murdered millions of people. So, I mean, you talk about somebody who was a megalomaniac to the fifth power. I mean, this guy, he didn't want to share the world with, he didn't want to share the world with FDR. He wanted FDR out of the way because he thought with FDR out of the way, in the post-war world, he would position himself better for global domination and the spread of communism. He viewed Truman as a political newbie, a little wimp who he could just bulldoze. So if FDR had lived, boy, it would have saved us 70 years of Cold War murder, because I know he would have brokered a better deal. What happened was the entire thing fell apart because Stalin hated Truman. Those two couldn't work out a deal. They couldn't get to the table. They couldn't agree on anything. Stalin ends up in China or influencing the Chinese, and the spread of communism goes all over the globe, and we have a mess on our hands. But if you look at and they're in my book, there are pictures. If you look at the pictures from the Tehran Conference, there were 28 months between the Tehran Conference and the Yalta Conference in 1945, and you can see the pictures and what FDR has been reduced to. It got to the point where he was having these abdominal problems and skeletal motor problems and all kinds of things, and the doctors, no matter what they gave him, his body wasn't responding. So I won't read you the entire list of what was going on with his body because I wouldn't bore you with it. But the advice of polio does not align with what his symptoms were. They don't align with polio. They align with poison. FDR was being poisoned. He was being slowly poisoned from inside the White House. I know that sounds fantastic, but there were people around FDR who wanted him out of the way. So today they have some of the opposition poisonings through history. I mean, it's been used since I researched it back to 331 BC. Claudius, Napoleon, Mark Antony, Cleopatra, all of these people had fruit tasters. They had fruit tasters for a reason.
Right.
FDR was being slowly poisoned from within the White House. It got to the point where his doctors said, I have no idea what's wrong with this man. And his doctors were Admiral McIntyre, Dr. Pullen, Dr. Bruin. They took him to the doctor of the day, the superstar doctor of the day. His name was Frank Leahy, the Leahy Clinic. Later on went on to found it. And he examined the president, and he said, this is a dead man walking. And it was released about 5 years ago, the memo of what Dr. Leahy found. That's where the symptoms that I found in my book, they didn't align with the advanced polio.
Right.
So after he dies, and of course the rest prophetically is history, everyone in Washington is talking about FDR being murdered. So in 1957, Eleanor Roosevelt, who had heard enough of this, and I think it struck a nerve, hired again, just like Elvis's father, hired a private investigator to get to the bottom of what the hell happened to her husband. This is 1957. This is years later. So what happened was she gets a runaround. She talks to the private investigator, gets a hold of the Surgeon General, gets a hold of Secret Service, all of it. They want all the documents. They want them all reviewed by an independent doctor, medical examiner. And it is told to her that all of FDR's medical records were stolen from a locked file in the bed.
Isn't that convenient?
But the bed is a magical place, isn't it?
Right. Well, let me ask you this, and obviously, like I said, we're winding down on time, but time goes on, and methods change and things like that. Can we touch on a little bit about Lady Di in the last few minutes that we've got on that?
We're coming to a close. We can't do another hour, Steve.
Well, if you're wanting to do another hour, we'll make it work.
I don't think that this world really knows what to do with goodness, and we always find a way to screw it up. And that's I'm seeing this more and more. We don't know what to do with things that are truly, truly good. Like a butterfly. You see this beautiful thing, you just have to touch its wings, don't you? And it never flies again. That same thing happened to Princess Diana. We don't want to give too much of the book away because I'm in the middle of it.
Right.
I'm contacting people in France and contacting people abroad to get their opinions, but Princess Diana had written a letter. Of course, everybody knows this, I think. She had written a letter about 6 months beforehand and gave it to her private butler, saying that my husband is planning a car accident, and I'm not going to survive this car accident. And she laid it out. This is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. This is 8 months before the car accident. So, if that's not a little suspicious in its own right, her very first lover when she splits from Prince Charles is her, didn't have Secret Service, but there's I can't remember the term for the people who protect the royal family, but there's a term for them. He's her first love after she splits from Prince Charles. It's uncovered by another member of the security team. This guy gets transferred away from Princess Diana and ends up being killed in a car accident. So these things started sticking out of my mind, and I started to dig a little bit. And the car accident, I won't bore everybody with it. The car accident happens. People are on the scene. They say the paparazzi did it. Completely untrue. The paparazzi were stuck at the hotel trying to figure out what was going on because they all went out the back door, not the front door.
Right.
So they go out the back door, they speed through all in the tunnel. Paparazzi's far behind. Didn't cause this crash. And I hear that the driver was drunk. I got his toxicology reports. The driver wasn't drunk, but it's impossible. They had him on video walking around tying his shoes, and then they try to say he was so drunk he couldn't see.
Right.
This was. I'm getting a testimony of witnesses who were actually there, who saw what happened.
Yeah.
It took them an hour and 20 minutes to get her to a hospital. They actually passed 2 hospitals, getting her to the 3rd hospital. So, it makes you wonder. The French is talking about these, over there they have different types of ambulances. They're called SAMU, S-A-M-U, and they're supposed to stick or something, I don't know. But they're trying to say that they're so much more advanced, and they're basically an operating room or a hospital on wheels, and this and that and the other thing. And they said that her heart stopped, so they had to stop. The speed of the ambulance has nothing to do with what's going on in the back.
Yeah, that's the people. They work on the back of people all the time. You see it when an ambulance is going by. There's people scrambling in there trying to keep these people, from flatlining.
The driver has one. He's been deemed with one responsibility: get there as fast as you freaking can. That's it. That's his job. So it takes him well over an hour, and by the time she's there, there's not much they can do for her. And the whole thing, but I don't want to get too much into this. But
Right.
Who Murdered Diana will be ready for sale next year. I'm actually going to start taking pre-orders here probably next month. So, again, I'll give you out of the website. It's whomurderedbooks.com, whomurderedbooks.com. Go look around, and if you like this sort of thing, if you like, I don't call myself a conspiracy guy. I'm not more of a history. I'm more of a history debunker.
You are a historical detective. That's your new title for me. Historical
okay, I like it.
detective.
I've been called a hell of a lot worse. I can tell you that, Steve.
Me too.
I like that. But, I always just go around and reinvestigate things that people forgot about looking into in the first place, I guess. But,
well,
FDR and Elvis, I don't think I've ever seen anything more glaring that these people were murdered. And they know about it, and they keep this, like Elvis Presley Enterprises.
right.
I'm no friend of them. They just keep making the money.
Well, there's that vibe of don't rock the boat and all this stuff, even to the point of, people hate to think, well, obviously someone's not going to do something to the point of killing. Which, if you've if you've looked back at any sort of history, like you were talking about Julius Caesar and all that, even up to the Machiavellians and all that, there's always this sort of, incestuous quality of killing each, and killing each other's brothers and sisters and this and that and taking this one off, and I knew as soon as Di basically gave him an heir and a spare, which she bore him 2 sons. It was kind of like, okay, your usefulness is now gone, because it seemed like up until then things were. I think they always probably had some problems. I knew there was supposedly the prince was dating, I think, Carmela at the time. I'm not for sure exactly on the dates and times, but it was one of those deals. I guess that was sort of like a first love for him. And
he never stopped.
Well, you know what I'm saying.
He never stopped seeing her. It was just like, okay, I'm going to get married, and then tomorrow I'm going to have lunch with her, and
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't have ever wanted that. It was one of these things. Diana was so different. Obviously, she was a Spencer and everything, so she was connected, by blood and whatnot. But her whole vibe was different, and
yeah, because up until that point, the royal family had been very distant to the people. They kept them at bay. They were aside. They were apart. And here we have this girl with this plume of blonde hair and these electric blue eyes. And, you just loved her on sight, and she would go over and she would talk to people. And she would shake their hands, and, she'd pick up the babies. And,
She was the people's princess, She really does. She really was.
She had that, and of course the world doesn't know what to do with anything that's good. So we have to kill her, And I don't think there's any question. I've been talking to Dr. Cyril Weck, who is forensic pathologist to the stars, and if you don't know who it is, type in his name and Google Dr. Cyril Weck. He chimed in on the Kennedy assassination from the very beginning. He's an expert in gunshot wounds, and he's been a forensic pathologist and a medical examiner for at least 90 now. So he just weighed in on the Jeffrey Epstein thing. And I'm running all of my documents by him. No, look, I'm smart enough to know I don't know everything. Okay? So what I do is I gather my information and I run it by people who do know everything about what they know. Dr. Weck, I run my medical things through and my autopsy things through. I have a slew of doctors that I run medical things through. So it's not just me pontificating saying, I think this, I think that. When I come to a conclusion in my book, even better, I've come to that conclusion because no one does research like I do. So I'm writing all this information through Dr. Weck on Princess Diana, and his head is just spinning as to how, I can't repeat what he said, as to how this could go on. This is a greater conspiracy than the JFK conspiracy. The JFK conspiracy, there's only one country involved. She was killed in France. So now we have 2 countries covering their tracks. The documents coming back are in French, which I'm having a miserable time with. If anybody out there who speaks French who wants to try and figure out what these documents are, I'd love to have you. So all of this stuff is in French, is written in the French language, and of course the translation into English is not always that terrific. So I'm trying to piece together all of that and give it to my authorities on the subject, and it's incredible how she was only there's a law, it's international law, and I think it's even between states. I've been told by Dr. Wett. If someone dies in Michigan, their body has to be embalmed before it goes out of Michigan. Okay?
Right.
So, unless you're the President of the United States, because either JFK or FDR were embalmed before they left.
Right, yeah, they had their own
Right.
special
Sure.
autopsy or person to check them out. Because like you said,
Sure.
back in the time, I think in Texas that was also how it was. They were supposed to take him straight to autopsy, and they said no, we're taking him out of here. Well, let me ask you this, and like I said, because we're right down to the wire at this point, Steve.
Oh, okay. Yep.
In the end of all this, how, after reading through all the reams and reams of paper and seeing the most dire, I don't want to say the S word, crap, and coming out of people and things that are business as usual, and it's just how it rolls, and kind of that, what was the old Pink Floyd song, have a cigar if you're going to go far, kind of manipulation game. How do you just, man, how do you get out of your damn house? How do you even, it's such dark stuff. I write about ghosts and stuff, but this is a whole nother level that you're doing.
I always say that the greatest enemy to human beings is human beings.
Yeah, right on.
What we do to ourselves is incredible, and there are the world is a big place, but it's a small place, and the greater majority of people on this planet wouldn't hurt a fly. So when I read these things, and it pisses me off, to be frank with you, but I have to realize that this is their problem, not my problem. In my family, I had a clinical psychologist who's been practicing for 40 years. And I asked him, I said, Joe, how do you do it? How do you listen to these people? And that's what he told me. He said, I have to realize I'm helping them with their problem, but their problem is not my problem.
Yeah.
So I have to kind of sort it out that way in my mind. For me, it's a scientific thing. It's a historical thing. And I just dig in and I dig up what's already been there. Because when a murder happens, everyone wants all the Elvis died or was murdered. Everybody's like, oh, they want all the information, and then nothing's out there. But after the decades that pass, when people die and we have deathbed confessions and documents are leaked, no one's looking anymore.
Yeah. Well, nobody wants to revisit that. It's one of those things. I think we, by nature, it's almost. I can't help but compare it to childbirth. I always heard there was a chemical in people's minds because it's so traumatic for the woman to have the child that immediately upon birth their body is flooded with this chemical that makes them forget elements of the intensity of the birth. So I think there's a certain thing we have sort of historical amnesia because it's prettier that way. We want to look at everybody, remember everybody in the best light. Well, I'll tell you what, Steve, we're at the point, man. Steve Albani, please check out his books, the Who Murdered series, and I cannot wait for this new book to come out. And Steve, if you'll hang on long enough for me to do a quick outro, I will talk to you on the other side of this.
One last thing I want to say, can I slip it up before you go?
Lay it on me.
All the pictures you're seeing of Princess Diana dead in that crash, every one of those pictures is fake. See you later.
Dark. My God. Now I'm going to be wondering we're going to have to get that book. I'm going to have to figure out what's going on, guys. Steve Albani. Check his books out. I don't know if he tells me dark stuff, and I'm a fairly dark guy, but he tells me some stuff that bothers me. But you know what? It doesn't have to bother you today. Do get his books, but go out and enjoy the sunshine and have the best fun you can. But as the trees melt with the sun and it soaks into the earth, and soon comes the night, make sure to look under your bed, in your closet. Maybe check your brakes to your car. You never know. You might have peed somebody off. But don't be afraid to learn and question, because that's how we all grow. So until next time, everybody, please be safe. I love you guys, for real. Thank you so much for watching the show and listening to the show. God bless you. And until next time, Stay safe, everybody.